Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Continuing the Call, a seminary dropout's guide to discernment. Before we get into today's episode, just wanted to take a sec and remind everyone to please make sure you're subscribed or following this podcast. Also, if you have a second, please make sure you leave a review or rate it as well. That just helps tremendously with the reach and getting more people to listen to this show, as well as getting future guests on for great conversations. Speaking of guests, our guest with us today is Mr. Dan McQuillan. Dan is a former seminarian for the Diocese of Rockville Center, having spent 3 years in college seminary formation from 2011 to 2013. After graduating from St. John's University in Queens, New York, Dan transitioned into teaching theology and literature at private and independent schools in New York and Rhode Island. Dan currently lives in Ireland with his wife Emily and his son Patrick. His company, Lamplighter Designs, is a web design and communications agency that designs custom, bespoke websites and communication strategies for parishes, schools, charities, and more. My conversation with Dan today centers around his initial discernment into seminary, how Dan also managed to maintain a life playing Division I lacrosse for St. John's while in seminary formation, and most importantly, the lessons that seminary formation taught him during his time of discernment, and also how he's using those lessons today in his professional career. Once again, please say a prayer for all the men and women who are discerning God's will for their life, and share this conversation with somebody who might find it useful. Thank you so much, and please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Dan McQuillan. Dan, thanks so much for being here with us. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself and kind of what you're doing now, and then we'll work backwards from there?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. So my name is Dan McQuillan. I'm 31, married. I have to my wonderful wife, Emily, and our son, Patrick. He just turned 2. We recently moved to Ireland, where my wife is from. I'm originally from Long Island, New York, and grew up there, college, and everything. And then we more recently lived in Rhode Island. And yeah, now we're in Ireland. Yeah.
Wow, what a change. So you said your wife's from Ireland originally. That's how
Right.
y'all ended up there?
Yeah. Yeah. She is from a town called Naas in County Kildare, so about 30 minutes southwest of Dublin. So, yeah, so it's nice. We've been here 4 months, really enjoying it. I've got a big, I'm looking out my door here and there's a big field of sheep and there's cows and horses. So it's, yeah, definitely a change of pace to where we were most recently in the States, but it's good.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how hard did she have to fight for y'all to make that move?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, in fairness, it was not much of a fight. It was something that, I mean, since, we got engaged, the question of where we would end up, or rather settle, was, I think, always on the table. And, my family is small. I've got some family on Long Island. I have some family in Nashville. We weren't living near my family. We were both working at a school. I was teaching literature at this Catholic boarding school up in Rhode Island. And we found ourselves every school break kind of heading over to Ireland or Long Island. But once we had our son, we knew we wanted to change. And my wife really wanted to be around her family again. So it was kind of a no-brainer eventually. Became a no-brainer, I should say.
There's worse places to be for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, I definitely want to kind of get into that. I'm sure we'll kind of loop back around and come full circle and hear about all of that. But do you want to start kind of with how you grew up? Obviously grew up on Long Island. Did you grow up Catholic?
Yeah. So I grew up Catholic. Well, I grew up on Long Island. Kind of very, how would you say, kind of, middle class Long Island upbringing. Grew up on the South Shore. Wonderful place to grow up. My mom was a nurse when I was young. My dad was a New York City cop. Real kind of Long Island middle class, life. We were never rich. We weren't poor. They sent my sister and I to, CCD classes. I don't recall much going to Sunday Mass. We did Easter and Christmas, but never family prayers. No kind of Catholic environment. My dad's parents, so my paternal grandparents, were Catholic, and whenever we were with them on the weekends, we would, they would bring us to Mass with them. And my family and I would, go to mass here and there, but sports, became precedent and things like that. Um, I suppose, I came to faith when I went to a Catholic high school. I attended Kellenberg Memorial High School, run by the Marinus brothers. Wonderful school, co-ed Catholic day school with a really solid Catholic environment. And yeah, I was kind of fascinated by my freshman year religion class. And then a friend of mine who I played sports with said, "Hey, why don't we go to this?" There was a prayer service before lunch. It was like 3 minutes. You could pop into the chapel and then go to the cafeteria. And so I said, "Yeah, sure." And it just started growing from there.
You said it kind of piqued your interest, your freshman religion class. Was it anything in particular? Was it the subject matter or the teacher or everything, or what really kind of was that shift for you?
Yeah. There was one day, so it was not the subject matter at first. And it wasn't necessarily the teacher was the greatest teacher I've ever had. But one day she randomly taught us to pray. And what she explained was, prayers of thanksgiving, prayers of sorrow, prayers of contrition, and then, what we would call intercessory prayers, right? And she basically kind of casually said, "I suggest anybody who's never done this, before you go to bed, take a minute, thank God for all the blessings in your life, start thinking through them, look back on your day, ask him for forgiveness for anything you might have done wrong, express your love to God," which I thought was a bit odd at the time. And then she said, "and take a minute and list out anything you need help with." And I don't know, that struck me. I tried it out. So I did it that night before I went to bed, and I kept doing it every day thereafter.
Like you said, you had some kind of Catholic upbringing. Had you prayed before that, or was that kind of the first time, at least intentionally at a certain age, where it kind of stuck?
Yeah, I would say it was the first time. It was the first time I ever prayed personally. If I
Yeah,
had
yeah,
gone
yeah.
to mass before, but it was always just, yeah, what we might
Hmm.
call public or liturgical prayer.
Hmm.
But I think the idea that praying for people I know and love, and also praying for myself,
Yeah.
that was the first time I did it.
So how
Yeah,
did that snowball keep kind of growing? So went from the
yeah, yeah,
prayer to the kind of having a friend invite you. What was kind of that next step in that Catholic journey?
yeah, yeah. So these kind of lunchtime prayer services that I started going to my sophomore year of high school. I suppose there was a confluence of things ultimately, but as I look back, so my friend and I are going to these lunchtime prayer services. Now, at the time, what they were was, you know, the chapel would be packed with students. It'd be the sign of the cross, maybe a reading or two. You'd say the Our Father, and then they would distribute communion.
Hmm.
Um, and so I was all of a sudden receiving communion often. Now, what ended up happening was that liturgically that's not correct, and it wasn't a mass. So the local ordinary eventually told the brothers. They said, "Listen, we love what you're trying to do, but ultimately, you know, unless somebody's on a hospital bed or, in certain situations, it has to be within the context of the mass." So, but I think grace was without question operative at the time, because I was receiving the Eucharist every day, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that was very interesting. I'm still, I think, probably making sense of all that.
Hmm.
So combined with that, I was intrigued by the brothers at my high school. I had a great lay teacher, taught me church history, who made, I was not a history guy at all, but just his own personal piety and, the subject matter I found interesting. And that's so my high school had these twice a year kind of confession services, one during Advent, one during Lent. They would pull in a bunch of priests from the diocese as well as the Marianist priests at the school. They'd scatter them out through different areas of the auditorium, and you could go during your religion class and go to confession. Well, as Providence would have it, I go to the vocations director. Um, and it's all very, as I say this, it's all very kind of poetic, maybe, or storybooky. but yeah, just mentioned it. I said, I'm getting more involved with faith, and I'm going to these prayer services. And so anyway, so I got his contact, and I received absolution, and that was it. But then I would say fast forward again. So junior year of high school, um, my mom would drop me off early to school every day on her way to work, and so I started going to daily mass they would offer daily mass at high school. So I was doing the readings each day. I was serving the priest at daily mass. So
Yeah, absolutely. No, like I said, it's always kind of a snowball. It's funny. It's like you have
yeah,
some people
yeah,
who it's the lightning bolt, and they knew from age 3 they were going to be a priest. For others, including myself, it's that slow
right,
snowball of like, hey, well, I can spend an hour a week in prayer, and then 2 hours, and then 3 hours, and then you're volunteering and reading. Um,
yeah, yeah,
Now,
100%.
I want to get to your presumably what is your first love, or was certainly now with your wife, which is lacrosse. But before we get
Yeah,
there, what were your kind of friends? Did other people start to notice, like, hey, Dan's spending a lot of time in the chapel? Or like, at what point did it become, kind of the other side of when you weren't at lacrosse, like, hey, he's kind of the church guy now? Did that ever
yeah,
happen?
yeah, yeah. So I think so, but I want to reiterate the high school I attended, Kellenberg Memorial, to this day is the brothers there have managed to imbue a real Catholic culture and identity.
Well,
And again, I'm 31. I'm sure the school has changed, and the world has changed, and COVID has had different effects on things. But I mean, when I was there, as I look back, right, guys I was playing lacrosse with, it was one of my fellow friends and lacrosse teammates who brought me to the chapel. Now, not every guy is, going to chapel and things like that, but, you know, I don't, it wasn't like the craziest thing that I was going to something that a lot of students were going
mm,
to, right?
yeah,
Guys on different sports teams, girls we were friends with. So yeah, so it's funny is obviously I definitely think they knew, oh, Dan is kind of becoming more religious, but I also think I wasn't trying to evangelize. I
hmm
wasn't trying to I wasn't necessarily dragging them with me. I think it was, if I had to look back from their perspective, maybe it was just something I was getting into. You know,
yeah,
um, but he also hangs out with us. He also plays lacrosse with us. He also, you know, so sort of in addition
mhm,
to who they already was, not this kind of, drastic change, if you will.
yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. And I think you're spot on with the idea that when you're in an environment, people are going to take advantage of it, and it makes it much easier. I found that at the school I was
Yeah.
teaching at, when we had a chapel, and it just made sense. Like, you'd see kids, and their passing
Yeah.
period would be praying in the chapel, and like, it would be weird if we didn't have a chapel on campus, and it just became normal. And I think it let a lot of kids feel a lot more comfortable because they didn't have to go out of their way, and it was just kind
Right.
of like,
Yeah.
yeah, the kid volunteering to serve at mass, whereas in a public school it'd be weird. In a
Right.
private school, it's
Right.
like, well, somebody has to do it. um,
Right.
so that's awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah, so let's dive into it. So obviously lacrosse played a kind of a big part in your life and who you are. Do you want to share a little bit about how that started and kind of that growth up until that same point in high school?
Yeah. So like a lot of kids on Long Island, where lacrosse reigns, I got into playing lacrosse at a very young age. I come from a family of successful lacrosse players. I believe both my uncles were college All-Americans in lacrosse. Well, I think one was a high school All-American, one might have been a college All-American. Yeah, they were both goalies. My cousins played lacrosse. They played girls lacrosse, but they were both very good. Both played in college. And yeah, I tried little league. I was not good at baseball. Didn't like it, and so started playing lacrosse and loved it. And yeah, again, both my uncles were goalies, so I wanted to be like them. I just started playing goalie and loved it. For me, I regret not playing other sports, but at the same time, like, I regret not playing it because I think I would have found other sports fun.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know, growing up, especially as a teenager, I just loved lacrosse so much. I would play year round. I played in fall leagues. In the middle of the winter, I would ask my friends, "Hey, do you want to, especially once we had our licenses. So let's go find a turf field and, bring a bucket of balls and, let's just, that was Friday and Saturday nights at times. And so I played in high school, and admittedly, I was good at it. It was nice to be good at something. I taught in high school for 9 years. And one of the things I found as a teacher and reflect on my own life, it's good to be good at something when you're a teenager.
Yeah.
And I often felt the kids who I taught, like who didn't have something, whether it be school grades, something outside of school, music, playing an instrument, being an artist, even joining a club, and they get really into that club, So for me, the thing I had and that I was good at was lacrosse. And I got bumped up to varsity as a sophomore, which was uncommon at my high school. And yeah, had a great season. Won some awards. Next season went well, started getting attention by college coaches. And then at the start of my senior year, I signed to go play lacrosse at Belmont Abbey College, which was as much as I wanted to go play D1, Belmont Abbey. They were, it was an attractive offer. I liked the school. When I went to visit it, they had, it's a Benedictine monastery that hosts the school. They had an adoration chapel. So I was like, I could kind of have, the two things I'm into here. But maybe, I don't know.
No.
That's kind of when seminary, I suppose, steps into my life. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, it's perfect. Because I was going to ask, so at this point now you have, on one hand, a vocations director handing you his contact information and a college scholarship. Now, how quickly did the lacrosse take precedence, or did it, or take through that kind of, so senior year, looking into what's next, what was kind of that discernment process, and where do you think everything kind of played out the way that it did?
Yeah. So my senior year of high school, a few things were happening. The recruiting process for lacrosse, hanging out with friends, everybody has cars. So, socializing a bit more, which was great fun, enjoying senior year of high school, but also, attending daily mass in the morning. The diocesan vocations director on Long Island at the time was a guy, Father Brian Barr. That's who I'd met 2 years earlier. And so I finally got the courage to meet up with him, and, we hit it off. And, to this day, Father Brian and I are very, very close. He's both a friend and father figure to me. I was just with him actually recently. And yeah, so, it was this kind of simultaneous, like, hey, I'm going to go to college, but like, I'm passionate about lacrosse. And, he put no pressure on me, to join the seminary. He just said, all right, let's just keep talking. If I had to guess, it's funny, I've never asked him this, but I'd say the fact that I was going to Belmont Abbey was like, he saw it as a good sign, that this is a place that could also give me what I want, and that is lacrosse, but also kind of nurture my faith, right?
So there's no real like conflict or anything. It was pretty clear that, hey, I'm going here to play lacrosse, and, there was no kind of back and forth between, oh, am I, supposed to give up lacrosse and play, or that comes later on though, correct?
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is that all that happened when I got to Belmont Abbey. So Belmont Abbey is a wonderful college. My close friend who was my best man at my wedding was a guy I lived across the hall from at Belmont Abbey. And it seems to still be a great place from what I know of it. But when I got to Belmont Abbey, a few things were happening. I was seriously discerning the priesthood, like spending time every day in the adoration chapel behind the dorm there at Belmont Abbey. So I don't know, like all of a sudden the priesthood question was probably tugging on me the most. I wasn't super satisfied with the level of lacrosse, and it also just, all my teammates, there was a lot of partying, and as much as I liked socializing and hanging out with them, I wasn't a huge drinker. I wasn't doing drugs, wasn't sleeping around, so there was this kind of like fish out of water feel. But and at the same time, I'm not gonna lie, at Belmont Abbey, there's a real kind of culture of Catholic students who weren't athletes too.
Hmm.
So it was I had my foot in both worlds, but at the same time felt like I couldn't fit into both worlds when I got
Hmm.
there. Um, so that's when also I said, I think I need to give the seminary thing a shot, because it's not going well down here. Um, and I also think I want to do the seminary now. So
Hmm.
yeah, called up Father Brian and said, I think I'm ready for this.
Awesome. Now, what drew you to the priesthood specifically? Was there anything, or was it just the lifestyle, or a love for the church, or was there what when you saw, Father Dan, what made that
Yeah.
attractive?
Well, during high school, especially my senior year of high school, I went on a senior retreat, and there was a young, somewhat newly ordained priest who came to say mass, and I saw him and thought I could see myself in his shoes. So, along with that, meeting Father Brian, these were men who I wanted to emulate. Um, there was a real faith life going on in me. There was a real attraction, especially to the Eucharist. So it was funny. I was in this high school where they were marrying as brothers, and to this day, I feel like I owe a lot of my life to them for what they've given me. But there was something about being a priest that I think it was more tied to the Eucharist and celebrating Mass.
Hmm.
That as a religious brother, I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I think I want to offer the Mass.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that that's one of the things, and it's funny how clear the reverse side of it is for the brothers. We had
Right.
Franciscan friars at my seminary, and they were the same way. It's like the guys who weren't on the ordination track would say the same thing of like, oh no, obviously love the Eucharist, love the Mass, but when I think of brother so and so, I look at service and all that. So it is
Yeah.
nice
Totally.
to see how the Holy Spirit does kind of guide us on that path.
Yeah.
Um, and I love what you said about kind of that emulation, right? The second you see somebody and you're like, I want to do that. I think that's kind of a missing link for a lot of our vocations. There's unfortunately, there's just not the exposure that there used to be of
Yeah.
young men
Yeah.
being able to look at priests and say, I want to be like that guy.
Yeah.
I'm sure you recognize it as, growing up in a house with a police officer, right? As a cop for a dad, like that's a career that kids look at and say, like every kid, I want to be a cop or I want to be a
Yeah.
firefighter.
Yeah.
Because I think it's so easy for them to look and say, like, I want to do that. And I think it certainly translates over to vocations. So we need priests who do that, who young men
Yeah.
can look at and say, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
yeah. So now take me through that transition. So you're all in and you're in Belmont, but you're like, hey, you know what? This is it. I'm called to the seminary. You call up Father Barr, I'm assuming. How did that kind of conversation go, and how did you end up actually in the
Yeah, yeah,
seminary?
it's funny. To this day, I think back of when I called him and said that I think I was outside of the library, and I was doing work and called him, and I think he was a bit shocked. I think he was, but we spoke through it, and I said, I spoke to my mom, and she supports it, and I think this is the right thing. I feel at peace. I think that was one of the big things was, it's funny as I look back, as young as I was when I went into the seminary. I think 18. I look back and I'm like, gosh, I was 18 is young.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but Father Brian was really supportive and said, okay. Now I was coming home for, I forget, it was either fall break or Thanksgiving. So while I was home over those few days, I did all the official meeting with him, my psychological evaluation. I forget all the different steps, but I remember, it was like kind of a rigorous process. I think I had to meet with a psychiatrist too. Like there was all these different people you had to meet with. You have to, I don't know if you had to do this, but take that test. It's like 500 questions. And
Yep.
it's like, do you love your mother? Do you love your father? By the end
Yeah.
of it, you're wondering, do you love anybody? But Yeah, no. So I did all that and I finished up the semester. I went back and finished up the semester at Belmont Abbey, came home for winter break. And, at the end of winter break, packed up my car. I needed a car. So I packed up my car and, drove the 30 minutes into Douglaston, Queens, where the
Mhm.
minor / college seminary house was. And I enrolled at St. John's University. And now the other thing was I thought I was going to have to stop playing lacrosse. So, um, but my club coach, I remember he called me up and he was like, "Hey, totally support you going to the seminary. I think it's great. I've had guys who go into all professions. He would always call it a profession." And he's like, "But I spoke to Coach Miller, this guy, Jason Miller, who's the head lacrosse coach at St. John's. And he's like, he's interested." So yeah, it was wild. It was, you know, I'm a seminarian, and then the other thing was the rector as well as my bishop allowed it.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
you know,
that's the awesome part. When I was reading through your
yeah,
story, that really stuck out to me. Because obviously the lacrosse side of things, they're like, absolutely, we don't care. I don't care if he
yeah,
wears all
yeah,
black and a collar. Right? Doesn't matter.
yeah,
He's going to
yeah.
come play lacrosse. Now, yeah. So how did that conversation with the rector and the bishop and vocation director go? How did you approach that with them, or how? I'm curious how that happened.
Yeah, well, I remember meeting with the rector. That was one of the meetings I had to do when I was home, and I brought it up to him, and he said basically like what would the time commitment look like, and I told him, and practices at the time were during the day at St. John's. So we're all at St. John's, and some guys went to Fordham, some guys went to uh, CUNY College, and so he was, so I actually, what was wild was despite all the commitments of being a Division I athlete, a lot of the commitments took place during the day when I was already at school. I think in season that spring, twice a week in the morning, I'd have to go in we had weightlifting at like 7 a.m. So I either missed mass or morning prayer those days. But no, like the rector was, I think he was more concerned as I look back. He was more concerned that I was going to get burnt out, um, which was something that happened, which is why eventually I stopped playing lacrosse. That was my own decision. Nobody
Mhm.
forced me to. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I applaud the rector and the bishop for
Yeah.
allowing that because, yeah, I mean, I think it gave, obviously, I'm sure, clarity in your vocation. Now, talk about real quick the similarities between, because so my sister was a scholarship athlete, and when I was in the seminary, like there's a lot of similarities between it, and that's kind of for people who have no idea about seminary life. I often point to, hey, well, it's similar to being on scholarship in the sense of, you still do
Yeah.
class and
Yeah.
you do all that, but you have kind of the extracurricular of that. What were kind of the similarities between the life and the commitment between the two?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. There's a structure and routine um, that shapes and forms your days and weeks. Um, Certain responsibilities to be on time for study hall. That was one of the morning commitments we had, uh, but that didn't conflict with seminary. But I still had to be up early for 7 a.m. study hall on a Wednesday. It's a focused commitment to live your life in a particular way, um, that I can't do act and treat myself however I want if I'm going to flourish as a Division I athlete. And in the same way, the seminary, right? There was a fairly, for a college age kid, a rigorous schedule of waking up at 6:30 for morning prayer and then having mass at 5:30 in the evening and then night prayer at 9. So it's funny. It's, looking back, it was really, my life was just very, very scheduled.
It's not the worst thing for a college kid, for sure, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what do you think the best thing about seminary was? What obviously, God had other plans taking you out. What do you think He had you in there for? What do you think you took away from it?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's funny. I look back on seminary and it was a real grace time in my life. I mean, the biggest takeaways I had in seminary was just what, they would call it the spiritual formation, right? Just a lot of prayer, and for me, it was what I loved most about seminary was just the quiet adoration, you know, um, It's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine, a fellow former seminarian, and he's taken recently to praying the Liturgy of the Hours. And as I was moving to Ireland, I gave him all my old copies of the Liturgy of the Hours because he had come over, he's looking at books, and I said, take what you want. And he said, never would I thought I would have come back to praying the Liturgy of the Hours. He said it never did anything for me in seminary, and I was very faithful to the Liturgy of the Hours, but it's something, for example, that I haven't taken into my life as a layman now. But yeah, just that time, of prayer, so the other thing for us is we had an optional holy hour every day. So you didn't have to be there, but the holy hours, you had to be there at the very start, actually, for night prayer at 9. And if you wanted to stay until 10, it was fine. But, so some guys left right after night prayer. Some guys would stay 20 minutes. But I just, I found that to be the most kind of enriching form of prayer. So I would often, spend the hour in prayer. And, that silence, Cardinal Sarah's book, right? The Power of Silence, that was really formative for me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, that book's fantastic, and I think it speaks to it. So now I imagine in those times of prayer was when kind of that discernment of, God saying, hey, this is next, I wanted you here and now I want you somewhere else. Take me through that. When did that kind of start, and how did that transition out occur?
Yeah, well, I think a few things happen. I think like many a young guy, especially college age guy who goes to seminary, you go in very zealous, and you think you're ready to be ordained, the day you arrive or something like that. And yeah, I was very zealous moving in, and then what happened was, so I stopped playing lacrosse just because it was way too much to balance life, school, seminary, and then Division I athletics. And I think what happened was in that second year of seminary was, doubt is the wrong word, but just this feeling of this started small and got big. I don't know if actually I do want to be a priest. I actually don't know if this is what God wants of me. And it was funny. It was the summer between, the summer before my last year in seminary. I was really struggling, like, do I stay? Do I go? I also knew, I had made a lot of big decisions, go to Belmont Abbey, leave Belmont Abbey, enter seminary, stop playing lacrosse, so I was just like, I was looking for some kind of consistency. I went to my spiritual director over that summer, and he actually said, after our conversation, it sounds like you're ready to leave and you're at peace with it. And I went back for another year because I wanted to be absolutely sure. And it was in that last year, again, spending a lot of time in prayer. It unfolded that I don't think this is what I want. I don't think it's what God wants. And I was lucky. I had the opportunity to go on a seminary retreat to Guadalupe, and entering there, that was weighed heavily on me. And I was, praying to Our Lady of Guadalupe. And yeah, when I got there, I finally it was almost like the decision was made. I finally felt the peace there. So when we got back, I informed the rector and my vocations director and everything. So, yeah.
Yeah. Now, did you know what you did want in that time? Because you say, well, I started to realize that the priesthood wasn't really kind of what I wanted. Did you have another path in mind, or was it just I don't know what's next, but I know that it's not here sort of thing?
Yeah, no, I was clueless, absolutely clueless as to what I wanted next. But what was good was I had a really great spiritual director, and well, actually, he was my first spiritual director, and then he got a parish assignment, or rather, he became head of a Catholic high school in the Diocese of Brooklyn after that. But I would still talk to him all the time, and I was approaching at the start of your fourth year of college as a college seminarian, you have to apply to major seminary. And I remember just as I got closer and closer to that, I was like, I am not ready for this. And his suggestion was, if you're not 90% ready to go to major seminary, he said, don't go. because that's you're wearing a collar every day. It's major seminary formation. I knew I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so no, I moved home. I became a commuter student to my university, finished up my philosophy degree. I had no clue what to do next. Yeah.
hmm Yeah. Now, so after that, it looked like the merriness kind of came back into your life.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, take us through that of as far as once you figured out what you wanted to do,
Yeah.
what took you on that path?
Yeah, so the Marianists run two high schools on Long Island, the one I attended, and Chaminade High School, which is an all boys Catholic high school. That was the first school they founded on Long Island. And yeah, so to be honest, I had this degree in philosophy. I thought maybe I'll just go teach religion, right? It's like every other
That's the
seminarian, right? Like,
go-to. Yeah.
oh, it's the go-to, right? Me and I have four very close friends, all of whom were former seminarians, um, for different dioceses too. And I think four of the five of us all went and taught high school theology, right, at
Yep.
some stage. Um, yeah, so I applied to my old high school as well as to Chaminade. Chaminade got back to me right away. They were like, we'd love to have you aboard. Yeah, so that was yeah. So I went and taught there for 3 years, coached lacrosse. So it was great. Um, and then yeah.
Mm. Nice. Now, what was your favorite part about teaching?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think just it's the relationships you form with the
Yeah.
kids, right? And um, I I no longer teach, but I taught at three different schools, and as I look back, at every school there were kids who would come to you who'd want to chat to you after class about something, or you know um, so those opportunities, and where yeah, I suppose they were all privileges, really.
hmm Absolutely. Any of the students curious about kind of your past with seminary and was that a big
Yeah,
topic of conversation?
yeah, it was funny. I would say when I was teaching at Chaminade, it was kind of a recent thing in my life, and it came up a few times. I was also the Chaminade asked me to do a lot of campus ministry stuff at the time, which I don't think was ultimately my strong suit. I was better in a classroom, but yeah, so some kids asked me about it, and one of whom was considering priesthood. I think he's graduated college now and is
hmm
working, but I think he still thinks of it. So yeah,
Yeah. No, it's funny how that works. And, almost all of these conversations that I have, there always seems to be that sense of, when men or women leave formation, they have the opportunity to talk about it. And there's always one or two of their either students or mentees or people that they talk to that through kind of their own discernment start to see, hey, maybe this is where I'm called. And, I look forward to that myself of, hopefully, we have saints down the line that come from either our classrooms or what we do that
yeah,
can intercede for us, in our
yeah,
poor witness
yeah,
that we gave
yeah,
them. Um,
yeah,
so awesome. So now, obviously, right now you're in web design, right?
yeah.
So how did you go from teaching classics, philosophy, theology,
Yeah.
classics? How did you go from that to the kind of technology side of it?
Yeah, well, so I have a friend back on Long Island who basically taught himself web design, and when my wife and I we had our son and we're seriously thinking about coming to Ireland, I knew I wanted just to kind of a break from teaching at the very least, or pursue something different. I knew I wanted something flexible, something I could, I love the idea. Yeah, everybody was kind of working from home after the pandemic. And especially once we had our son, right? Being able to work from home was cool. And even working for myself. So, long story short, I reconnected with my old friend who, I mean, without him, I could have never gotten into web design. I mean, he taught me so much about web design, and so I have a business called Lamplighter Designs, and we're basically a kind of web design and communications agency, and we make kind of it's funny how you're always kind of somehow attached to the church. So we design websites. We do email marketing and social media management, mainly for parishes as well as Catholic schools. So that's our niche. And we're very proud to do it. And for me, it's funny. I still, yeah, I get to meet a lot of priests who,
Hmm.
we're trying to do good things at their parish, one of which is to have a really good online presence in order to evangelize better. So yeah, it's been great that professionally now I get to go in and help them with that.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's the dream, is that I think that all of us have deep down of, finding something professionally that helps the church.
Yeah.
And no, absolutely needed. I was going through some of the websites you've done, and they're fantastic.
Oh,
So
thanks.
I'll
Yeah,
definitely,
yeah,
yeah, link that below because it's needed. My last job, literally all day, every day, I was just clicking through different parish websites and things and looking, and it breaks my heart, some of them. So
yeah,
some of
yeah,
it's like hopping in a time machine and you're like back 30 years, and yeah, we
yeah,
need it. So no,
yeah,
it's a definitely needed profession, and then also ministry as well.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
100%. We, and one of our things too, if I could just put in a little plug here, is
Yeah, please.
we try to limit, or we try to take a lot of that busy work that parish office administrators and even pastors and priests themselves. I just it's my belief, be a priest, go be a priest,
Yeah.
serve the people in your community. Don't spend hours, trying to make edits and stuff like that. So we're able to provide those services at like an affordable rate too. We're a kind of subscription based web design company now.
Hmm.
So we've encountered at first number of parishes who just they couldn't afford a $5,000 website, but a website at 175 a month, 199 a month or something. So it's good. Yeah, it's nice to be able to do something good for the parishes and priests and religious orders and Catholic schools um, that have a vision. You know.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's the most hopeful thing to see is when parishes. I'm sure you get it all the time, but there's a life that comes with those parishes who want a good
Yeah,
website and want things in
totally.
because it's just a
Totally.
reflection of their desire, right, for the salvation
Yeah.
of souls. It's very rarely just because they want a nice website. It's because they want to reach people,
Yeah.
and that trickles down in all their ministries. So now, tell us about how you met your wife and how that came to be,
Yeah.
and kind of where your vocation is now.
Yeah. So it's kind of a wild story, funny story, I should say. So I left seminary in May of 2013, at the end of my junior year of college. Part of that was I thought I'd maybe go back to seminary, to be honest. You know, but so a year later, I remember talking to a Franciscan friar of the Renewal in New York, and he like point blank, he's like, "So do you think you're going to go back?" And I was like, "To be honest, there's nothing pulling me back in.
Hmm.
I don't feel that tug again. It's not what I want." Um, yeah, so where I was working, I met a girl. I went on one date. Nothing came of it. Yeah, I think I was kind of trying to navigate. I just graduated college. Um, and it's also like a feeling of being a bit, like you talk to, being 22, 23 years old, like, oh, where'd you go to college? Oh, I was in the seminary for, basically 3 of my 4 years in college. But yeah, no, my that original spiritual director of mine had a priest friend, still has a priest friend in Rhode Island, and he went to visit him, and they went to a barbecue at my now in-laws house, and
Wow.
he he was chatting with my wife, and my wife, although she was from Ireland, she was just about to start at Providence College. So it was wild. Was she ended up once we met, we ended up realizing that she knew some of my friends from high school who were attending her college, and yeah, so I'd say it was probably like a year and a half after leaving seminary. I was just starting to work and everything that I met my wife through that, our mutual priest friend, and
That's a
um,
solid spiritual director right there. That's someone who,
yeah, 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 right,
yeah, he had your best intentions in mind
yeah.
from day one. Whether it's priesthood or whether it's getting married, he was going to help you out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. To his credit, I will never forget. Talk about seminary stories. My first ever spiritual direction, I sat down, and the first thing he said to me, he said, "Listen, I don't care if you become a priest or not. Um, and that was, yeah. So
Mhm.
he's lives by that. Um,
You know,
yeah. So yeah, please.
I'm glad you brought that out because I have that printed out. You wrote an article in
Yeah.
2020 called "Dear Future Seminarian," and
Yes,
I
that's
want to
right.
get to that. I wanted to end with that,
Yeah.
but I literally have it highlighted on there that you put that in there,
Yeah.
that conversation, and I think that encapsulates it so much. When I read it, I was like, this right here, this is what
Yeah.
all of it's about. The full quote in there is listen, I don't care if you become a priest or not. All I care is that about when you leave here, you can say Jesus Christ is Lord. And like
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
me, like that's what it is. And I wish every spiritual director, every rector, every bishop
Yeah.
had that in mind because that's what it's
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
awesome. So yeah, how'd that conversation go? So he called you up, said, "Hey, I met this girl. You should meet her." And then y'all
Yeah,
start
yeah.
dating.
So we eventually met. She was coming to New York because to this day, her close friend from Ireland lives in New York. They'd grown up together, and yeah. So I met her one afternoon in New York City, and yeah, it was just, it was like I remember I was eventually later that day with my now brother-in-law, not one of her brothers, the guy who married my sister. I was with him, and he was like, "Oh, how'd it go?" We met up afterwards because he had been in the city that day, and I was like, "Oh," it was like, and I'd said, if I don't marry her, I want to marry somebody just like her,
Wow.
and yeah, so we, started dating, and long distance. We see each other every few weekends, and eventually I met her family, she met my family, and yeah, and then I moved to Rhode Island, in order to be closer with her. Um, and then we yeah, eventually got engaged and got married here in Ireland, and now we're here.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Take me through kind of that. At what point did you start seeing yourself as future husband and accept that kind of
Yeah.
spiritual vocation side of it?
Yeah. Well, like admittedly, even when we were dating, initially I was like, oh, is this now what I'm called to? Is this what I want? Is this what God wants? And yeah, I think for me it was kind of resting in, okay, listen, priesthood is not what you want or what God wants, it seems. Uh, but you know, I knew I loved my then at the time girlfriend, and that I could spend the rest of my life with her. And so that was, it was sort of like growing into that
Mm-hmm.
commitment, right? Like it was funny. Like I think back when I was in seminary, this guy, he was a year younger than me. He's now a priest on Long Island. Just like I saw him get more and more committed to the idea of being a priest,
Mm-hmm.
whereas I was just like less and less committed, right? Like he was not one of these guys who discerned from year to year, like, oh yeah, no, like I'll see how it goes next year, or yeah, no, this is good for now. Like he got more like, yeah, this is what I'm called to. This is what I want to do. Um, and so yeah, so I felt like that same process happened to me with my wife. Like, no, it's time to get married. She would say I waited too long to ask her hand in marriage, but no, it's all good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny. It's awesome to see that, and I think that that's something that when I look back, one of the greatest gifts I think seminary gives people or religious formation give people is that sense of mission. That
Yeah,
like it's very clear that hey, I am in the seminary, I'm in formation to take vows and to be a priest, and every day you have to wake up and you have to grow. Like it doesn't. No one is born a priest. No one is born a religious. Right? You have to work at it and get to the
right,
place where I think it's really clear that one day you're going to be up preaching in front of a whole bunch of people, so you better know what you're talking about.
right.
And I think that's lost in marriage a lot of times is like it just kind of happens. There's not that sense of I need to grow to be ready to be a husband, to be ready to be a wife. What has that been like for you? Kind of what are you growing towards, and what are the areas that you've seen of like, hey, I want to be a husband who does this, right? Like, I guess, do you have those? Obviously, I'm assuming you have those examples in your life, or what mission of being a husband, of being married, do you strive to?
Yeah, I mean, it's that's a big question.
Yeah.
Um, but the question, right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think I don't know. The one thing I think about and try to be is attentive, to my wife and son.
Mhm.
Um, I heard that once that, there's it's ultimately a different conversation, I think. But like, there's a lot of ministries or companies out there that have certain ideals of like Catholic masculinity, right? Um, and it works for some guys, and for other guys, it doesn't, right? And I remember talking about that with someone, and a priest actually, and who's done a lot of counseling, and he said is, what a man has to be ultimately is just attentive, so whether you like sports or scotch or bourbon or whatever, right? Ultimately it comes down to attending to your wife, your children. um I think praying together is important. I suppose that's one thing I do, that we do, that we try to do every night, is say some prayers together. Obviously, Sunday Mass and holy days of obligation and things like that. So, um, yeah, I don't know if that fully
Mhm.
answers the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It does. It does. And I think you're spot on with that as far as the being attentive and what a blessing it is now that, I think we're both in this case that we get to work from home. We get to
Yeah,
spend
yeah,
more time. My wife and I always joke like we've spent more time together in our first year and a half of marriage than some couples do their entire marriage in the
yeah,
first 10
yeah. No,
years.
100%. Yeah,
Um, and it's such a blessing because yeah, it's one of the
yeah,
greatest gifts, and I think that being attentive and small things like praying every day with each
yeah,
other is massive.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, so I mentioned that article you wrote, the Dear Future
yep,
Seminarian. It's been a
yeah.
bit. I kind of went on the deep dive. I don't know how much you recall about it, but either if you recall it or if you kind of were to rewrite it today, what's your? I'm giving you a blank canvas. Give me another, Dear Future Seminarian. What do you have to say to the guys listening?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I wrote that article. I forget. I do decent bit of writing. I've written for Catholic publications. Yeah, I really enjoyed writing that one. I think looking back, right, like seminary, there's a lot of I think you can approach prayer as like work, and this is what I have to do, and tick these boxes of morning prayer, evening prayer, and night prayer, and those are good kind of guardrails, to keep you anchored. But I don't know. I think is just try to pray in such a way that it's not work and it's not performative, but that it's you just sit there and try to receive God's grace. Um,
Mm-hmm.
to recommend a book, Sister Ruth Burroughs and Andre Loof are two spiritual writers that um, I have found really helpful in that. That um, yeah, just and then I think prayer is not what we do, but um, allowing ourselves to be acted upon, by God. And so I think do approach seminary with that, because seminary can quickly become just ticking boxes, and the old phrase, you keep the rule and the rule will keep you. I think okay, that was probably applicable in a different context, but nowadays I think just pray, let God act on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. That docility is, I mean, it's called
Yeah,
formation for a reason of, kind
yeah,
of be
yeah.
the to quote, Fulton Sheen, that treasure in clay, right? To be molded and to be opened up. I'm going to flip it. I'm going to put you on the spot one more time. Dear future husbands, dear future fathers, write that letter for
Yeah.
me. What do you have for them?
Oh, oh gosh. Uh, just it's the best thing. It's hard, but it's the best thing. And it's fun too. It's fun. Yeah, being a husband and a dad, like getting to have a little 2-year-old son is the best. It's um yeah, I suppose just any advice would be, I think is just don't be afraid to make that commitment for any guys who might be on the fence about it.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, absolutely. It is like you said, it's the best thing. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a wild adventure. Um,
Yeah.
I guess last question with that.
Sure.
So your kid growing up in Ireland, is it going to be a lacrosse stick or a hurling stick? What
Yeah.
sport?
Yeah. No,
What's it going to do?
I think it's going to be a hurley. Yeah. I think it's going to be a hurley. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's something I always thought maybe I'll still teach him to play lacrosse.
Mhm.
So I say I enjoy playing golf, so I'll teach him to play
Okay,
golf and
yeah, that's a good
play
middle
golf
ground there.
together. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time. Your story is incredible. I'll link
Thanks.
a couple of the articles that you've written in down below in your business,
Sure.
of course. I wish you nothing but the best. And for everyone listening, I hope we're starting to see kind of all the different ways that God calls us, all the different people
Yeah.
God calls. And yeah, it's a good thing. And we're all kind of in this beautiful mess together.
Yep.
And Dan, I really appreciate you sharing your little piece of that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mr. Dan McQuillan. Be sure to look in the links below to follow along with Dan's work at Lamplighter Designs, as well as read some of the articles he's written in the past. Be sure to share this episode with somebody who might find it insightful or benefit from this conversation. And last but not least, again, please make sure that you're following along and subscribe to this podcast. And please, if you can, leave a review or rate it. That way we can keep having conversations that are helpful and keep bringing on amazing guests like Dan. Once again, thank you so much for listening to Continuing the Call, a Seminary Dropout's Guide to Discernment.